Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Making Nobody Happy. Today, I want to talk about the instinct against liberalism. And by that, I don't mean leftism, I mean liberalism, the political ideal of personal liberty, rather than, say, massive top down governance and control. So there is an argument to be made that liberalism was an experimental strategy. It is a relatively new idea as a governmental strategy. So there's an argument to be made that it was an experiment, and that it was an experiment that had never been attempted on a large scale before America, and so it didn't really have any proven track record, and that other forms of social organization had and have a better one across time and differing conditions. One thing you may not realize is that even today, monarchy is actually one of the most popular forms of government. And even when you don't have a monarchy, having a very, very top heavy, strong government is very much, generally the preferable way of running things. So, but we did it here in America. And you know what? Liberalism actually ended up going fairly well, to everybody's surprise. It changed a lot of conditions, it made a lot of things better for a lot of people. But of course, like any political system, liberalism has its own endemic problems and its own side effects and its own cost and its own pathology. And maybe now what's happened, as it seems like more and more people are kind of losing faith in it, um, we've reached perhaps the point in history where the pathology of liberalism has become more keenly felt and understood and articulated. And partly this is just bound to happen anytime a system becomes the dominant or default or assumed manner of being. And now, after this initial rush to conquer the world with it, we're left, in a sense, to just live with it and figure out, well, where are we going? What is our direction as a nation? And suddenly we start looking around and noticing, you know what? Now that we have this everywhere, things still aren't perfect. We become more and more aware of our own disappointments and the dissatisfaction that still remains in our heart. And we've had some time now to think over the flaws that still attend our lives under liberalism, or maybe even because of it. We've seen the ways that it can go wrong, the negative outcomes, and we have the sense that maybe it hasn't given us everything we hoped and everything we were promised. There was a failure to deliver, or maybe we've decided that the costs were too high, the danger was too high, whatever it is. And when you get that kind of tension in the system, people want to break out of it, and people want to start trying new adaptations to life to see if they might be more optimized to some internal urge of where they think the human race needs to go. And that can take all sorts of form, from complete decentralization of something like anarchism all the way up to, much more authoritarian approaches to things. And it seems like in the West, which has generally been the sort of home of the liberal order, there's generally more of a trend towards acceptance of authoritarianism, of a governmental type, than we've had in a long time. So why is this? Why do we feel this way? I mean, maybe liberalism, maybe it's made us weak and decadent, so that we're taking for granted the benefits of it because we don't know what it's like to be outside of it anymore. Or maybe it's caused too many washouts to pile up at the lower end of the system, which is something that happens in a free system. Or maybe just the psychic burden of everyone having absolute freedom to define the contours and meaning of their existence is just proving to be too much. Considering people already have a lot burdening them. Maybe they'd prefer it more if that were provided for them. If more and more of this was provided for them than being just left to them to figure out. Maybe liberalism doesn't even work without some grounding, some grand unifying narrative. in a civilization. And once that narrative goes down or fractures into many competing and contradicting narratives, the liberal system can't really function anymore. Maybe the internal tension and variance goes beyond the tolerance of the system and starts to just pull the whole thing apart. And maybe people sense this, and it makes them instinctively try to break the system, regardless of how necessary it actually is for everything that they're enjoying, all the things that make up their life, even their ability to question the liberal system. We we shake under this pressure of enforced unity, of living together in this massively contentious diversity that liberalism allows, and we just can't take it. So we want this great reorganization, this great consolidation where everything comes back together, or maybe even a great scattering, I said, at the other end, if the anarchists could have their ways. There's a natural instinct in humans that once certain problems inherent to a system pile up sufficiently, even intangible problems like depression and anxiety, they try to flip the board and reset all positions to zero. There's a book, I've talked about it before, called The Great Equalizer, and you see that pattern again and again and again. Basically, there's this pattern that stability always produces inequality, which gradually increases the inherent tensions in the system as you actually get more diversity that is allowed. And only a chaotic, like a catastrophic resetting of the conditions of society resets all that, because it basically smashes everything down to zero. And that's the only thing that actually really equalizes everything is catastrophe. So we have this huge, complex, powerful society. It is enormous. It has become this globe-spanning order, so big, so hard to even understand, so complicated, so many eggs and balls being juggled and kept in the air at once all the time. And you can't drop any of them because the whole thing could come apart. And if anything goes wrong here, it's a disaster for absolutely everything. Now, people just feel, I think, this psychic weight of that on them, of this enormous and complex and Byzantine society. And yes, it is powerful, and it produces a lot. It has a lot of complexity. There's a good side to that, but it also comes with these huge costs, because of course it does. Everything does. And a lot of the costs that it comes with are some of them are tangible, but many of them are actually intangible psychic costs. Just the sheer inhuman scale of things, how far away they are, the sheer amount of things that weighs on you in a very intangible way. But since there doesn't seem to be any way to prevent those costs from accumulating, some people just gradually get frustrated and want to reset the game. Flip the board, like I said, either to chaos or to complete uniformity, complete control. Let's have someone take this in hand. Maybe the people who feel that way imagine the cost of the reset will be worth it. Maybe they think the costs won't really be that great and they'll get to keep what they have in the reset. And this is another lesson from The Great Equalizer. Great levelings are always negative. They are not positive. There are always things like war and famine and disease. Because rising is basically caused by production and defaults are always downward, well, the only way to really, really level things out with these great resets is downward pressure, not upward pressure. You can lift everything through production, but you inevitably, all creative production just results in a variety of outcomes, internal tensions, internal differences. You end up with massive differentials. And it's much easier. It's much easier to resolve your tensions by just taking everyone down to the same base level, where it's like, these people have got up here, these people have got up here. Well, you know what? Maybe I don't see a way to catch up, but you know what we can do? we can destroy all advantages, so we're all just basically starting over and we get a new chance. It's just never been the case. I mean, like this book went through something like 12,000 years of history. Things never suddenly just got catastrophically. That's a new word I'm trying to invent. If you're familiar with eucatastrophe, it's this idea of suddenly, instead of a sudden disaster, like sudden wonderful everything is great. But it's just not historically the case. No, it's always catastrophe, not eucatastrophe, that ends up happening. Progress doesn't come like that. It only comes positively in stable games. So like a stable thing that is holding steady, that is consistently, and stability produces that, and it always produces it unequally. Progress, as I said, progress only really comes in stable games, and when it comes in those games, it comes unequally, because that's just how things work. And I think a lot of people who feel like, well, that's okay, that's fine. We're gonna flip the board of society. We'll tear it all down. I don't really think a lot of those people are really thinking, really in any detail, thinking that scenario through that deeply. They're following their inherent moral and social instincts. There's just this feeling that people have, seems to be some sort of built-in relief valve, kind of like with the water heater. As the pressure builds up, eventually there's a valve that, once it gets to a certain point, it's just going to open up and it's just going to start dumping the water everywhere, because it's either that or the whole thing explodes. And I think people have something like that, and maybe it's justified, maybe it isn't justified, but people are not really, really deeply thinking about this whole scenario. They're just letting loose their instinctive and emotional safety valve reactions. And maybe in a way that's actually unavoidable and justifiable. Maybe that's just part of how human beings and societies are meant to work, as this dynamic and living and adapting and competing entity, not as some static mineral edifice that's just going to stay what it is forever. This big thing that we built, and it's never going to change. It's just going to be what it is. There's things that are going to keep trying to add things on top of it, and then there's going to be forces that are also within us going to say, wow, this has become too big, this has become too heavy, this has become too distant, and it needs to change. It needs to be altered. We might have this desire of always of like, we're the ones who got it right, and the way that things are right now is the way it's always been, or the way it must always be, even if it's something that, well, this state of being is really only like 10 years old. And these days, so much of what actually comprises our life is things that are hyper novel entities. But, we have this desire to crystallize the state of humanity into one form and into one path. And maybe there's just something kind of pig-headed about people, that we don't like that. We find that inherently frustrating. We find that inherently reprehensible. It somehow goes against the very sort of creatures we are. To pull up a quote from Dostoevsky, maybe it's true, as he once said, that if humanity could ever devise a perfect system where just everything was taken care of and no one had to worry about anything and it was all figured out, there would still be those that felt the need and even the moral necessity to break it just to make something happen. So maybe the instinct to destroy liberalism is inevitable, either an inevitable consequence of liberalism itself or an inevitable consequence of history, or maybe it's just an inevitable consequence of the unruliness and craziness of the human race. Maybe our sense of the limitations and injustices and inadequacies of liberalism is just grown too great. So we're happy to throw ourselves out of it, even if we have no idea what it is we're actually throwing ourselves into. And we're probably wrong if we actually think it's necessarily going to be something wonderful. That tends not to be what happens during those sorts of great levelings and great resets. But I mean, it's also possible maybe our instincts are out of whack because people are ignorant about the world really is or what it really could be like because we're too sheltered behind our technological wall and the comfort and the ease that the system provides. So it allows our instincts to go kind of cuckoo and misread things and just get confused. Or maybe it's kind of like having an immune system, but it doesn't really have anything proper to act on. So it's become like allergies. It's become hypersensitized and it's attacking the very things that are actually meant to be like either benign or good for you. Like some people have food allergies. Why? Because they mistake it for this plant. Why do we attack the plant? Well, because you mistake it for some sort of harmful foreign invader rather than just some, benign thing. Anyway, I mean, this is something we also have to consider is to what degree are our instincts being highly altered by the shifting of the entire system into which those instincts are lodged, by which I mean the modern world. Maybe our maybe our information gathering and evaluation systems that we possess as humans weren't designed to work on the kind of things that we have these days that are being used to feed them. Maybe they were designed to work on a very narrow and proximate, intimate data set like our home and our immediate community. And what we've done is we've basically reduced our involvement in those arenas, the arenas for which those instincts were designed, and instead we've extended our data collection system out to this massive but very shallow and very non-intimate extent through technology. So basically while still bringing the same kind of mind to the problem, we've intensely altered the means by which that machine is fed, what is being given to it. And so it may not be optimized for the way that we've actually dislocated and reset it. We've sort of taken a dolphin and put it in a wetsuit flopping around on the sidewalk. That's a terrible analogy. Let's not go with that one. So anyway, but this is what I'm trying to say. Maybe the moral and social instincts that we natively possess were never designed to receive their data from a constant stream of indirect, non-personal sources gleaned from a set of 400 million or more people. Maybe the calibration of our moral emotions is just no longer in alignment with reality, simply because they operate best, not only, but best, at a certain specified level of intimacy and detailed and personal knowledge and personal efficacy, our ability to actually act on the things we're hearing, the environmental limitation, the actual environment in which we are immediately lodged, and regulation, the things that kind of keep it in check. And you say, well, why do people behave so crazy online? Well, it's like, well, because you've taken out a bunch of the things that would exist in the natural social environment, like even just face-to-facedness, tone of voice, all sorts of things. And how many people can you even fit in a room? Really basic stuff like this. And we've completely altered them. And at the same time, we've added things like, well, you used to be limited by how many people you could know or talk to, or even how loud you could raise your voice. And it's like, well, how crazy do you look or disagreeable do you look so that people would listen to you? And it's like, well, guess what? We've given you the ability to be heard by millions instead. I mean, this is what I'm saying. We've vastly changed the environment, but we're still basically the same creatures. So we need to consider this possibility that we weren't really designed to work like this. And so, yeah, you're going to get some weird effects. You're going to get some really wacky emotional results, partly from not having the things they're used to being working on available, and also from having things it was never supposed to work on and work like that suddenly be immensely available. You know, and this is what I'm saying. Maybe we're not meant to see all and float above the world like some sort of disembodied spirit. Maybe, as so many science fiction books have said, humans aren't really designed to be gods and make kind of bad ones. Maybe seeing all the gleaned moments of millions isn't really something that we're generally very well adapted to do without having a really high chance of screwing it up and misinterpreting what we're seeing, misinterpreting the data, misinterpreting our response to it, not having the right sort of checks on our behavior and our responses and corrections and things that held them back, and also even just having those built-in psychological feedbacks, things of, well, you have a system that is designed to track this, and if it sees this, good, yeah, I'm having good feelings and laying down some nice little pathways in my brain. Bad things, bad feelings, oh, this is making me do something that's going to make me take an action, but it's something that's near enough to me that I can take an action, and I can understand what my action did, and I can understand the response to it, and so I can build functional little things inside my brain. Instead, we're trying to do that, but we're trying to do that with this entirely abstracted, fictitious environment, where it becomes almost impossible for us to track things, and we lose things, including like our sense of knowledge and efficacy. And maybe that's exceptionally hard on us. Maybe that's extremely depressing for us. Maybe it dislocates us. Maybe it alienates us. Maybe seeing all is something we weren't really meant to see. And there's a sense in which, well, you really aren't seeing all. You still have the same limited individual perceptive capacities, but now we can replace all the things you used to see with, you're just going to see whatever's designed by this algorithm that comes right through here, through this little device. That's going to alter your whole world and your whole landscape. That's going to alter your feelings about everything, your understanding of everything. Maybe also being able to do all, maybe wielding immense power over the lives of millions is also not a burden we're not well adapted to carry, without a grave tendency towards error and miscalibration and misguided action. And these days, so many of the games we're playing involve trying to develop these unilateral actions that play out over the lives of millions at these federal and even global scale levels. Maybe being in a state of constant hyper arousal and selective data immersion, because the data that we're getting is highly selective. Most of the daily data in your life is really pretty banal. Like it's nothing too crazy is really happening right around here where I can actually physically see with my eyes. I can look at my phone and be like, oh my gosh, so many crazy things happening in the world. A million things. This thing to get angry about, this thing to worry about, this. And I'm reacting to that as if it were the thing I was seeing looking around here with my own eyes. The truth is, I can only see physically with my own eyes, I don't know, maybe 100, 150 feet that direction. I can see one house across the street. Turning this way, I can see two houses this direction, and then a park. And you know what I see going on? Absolutely nothing. What you actually encounter in much of your daily life tends to be pretty banal, pretty forgettable, not super reactive. Maybe you go to the grocery store, maybe you go driving and it upsets you a little bit, but so much of what you're seeing that is unselected data. The only thing it's selecting is, well, it's stuff that's happening close enough that you can see it. Well, the phone and the media and the algorithms have completely changed that, enormously. And the data is highly selected. It's like, well, here's one little thing that happened that one person did in this place, thousands of miles away from you, that you've never seen and never will see, and don't know any of these people and can't do anything about, but we're going to dump that onto you, and your brain basically is absorbing it like it's something that's happened within the 500-foot radius that you can actually see around you. That's going to do some unusual things. That is going to create these states of emotional hyper-arousal and just strange reactions. Even your judgment of what is the world, what are the other people, because humans attune so much of what they believe the world to be and what they should do, what they should think about themselves by looking at just the other people around them. We are group animals, that was attuned for kind of the pack, because, previously it was like our family, that would mostly be our family, maybe your town at the most, but it certainly wouldn't be the 200 people out of 400 million who happen to have this particular wonky way of looking at things. But of course, the system favors that kind of thing. It's like so much what you would get even with the news. It's like, here's what 4 crazy people said about it, and it's not that hard to find them. And the system wants to find those crazy people. Even I'm thinking, I remember someone delving down and saying, well, really, how much of what people said was this whole thing that we can build a narrative out of? Because you say, well, how many examples of something does it take for people to think, this is what something is, or this is what is reasonable, or this is what it should be, or this is how I should react? And the answer is, I don't know the exact number, but it's not very many. And when you're looking at percentages, actually, it can just be the tiniest amount. And the problem is that tiniest amount can end up leading around the whole society by the nose, because it pulls our instinctive reactions along with it. All we have to do is have enough people see it. I remember Red Letter Media, they did a lot of movie review type things. They did an analysis of Ghostbusters, and it was when that reboot came out with the all-female Ghostbusters, and it was just about how studios can use marketing to push certain narratives for their own personal advantages, and how much is a thing. And so they just did the math on it and was like, oh, well, we keep hearing this narrative about everyone who disliked Ghostbusters was some sort of horrible misogynistic troll who had these terrible things to say, and that is like the entirety of this group. And everyone who didn't like the trailer. And so they actually did the math and said, well, how many comments were there actually? Oh, well, there were this many, thousands upon thousands upon thousands. What percentage of them were basically just like, well, here was the first thing. He said, how many people watched and just had nothing to say about it? And it's like, well, the vast majority of everybody, like 90% of people saw it and just were like, whatever. They had nothing to say. Complete banality. Like there was nothing there. You're like, okay, so just 10% of people to begin with had anything to say at all. You're like, well, what percentage of those people said something negative? And it's like, well, just like 1/10 of those people. And it's like, okay, well, what percentage of them just said, doesn't look that interesting, or that doesn't look funny? And it's like this enormous number. And when they finally get to it and they're digging down, they're like, how many people actually said, like, these crazier things? And it's like, well, it turns out it's like 0.0001%. It's like, it's really just like out of 50 million people who saw it, like 50 jerks. And it's like, well, guess what? Out of 50 million people, 1 in a million of them are going to be crazy jerks. But in a normal society, we would find a way to push those people aside and ignore them and not really listen to them or see them and not take them that seriously and not take what they're saying as representative of 50 million people. That is the funny thing. This is the trick about it, is allows us, the way that media works allows us to perceive very tiny, very weirdly selected representatives as somehow creating a narrative for some vast whole, like humongous whole. And it's just because that's how the system works. It allows that because we have a system that it looks and says and is used to seeing a pretty small number of things around it, and then building an understanding of your entire world from those things. And now all those things that are actually filling it are culled from this enormous thing. And it's like, well, by just playing the odds, and the algorithms really want to play the odds and favor the craziness, because the craziness, people want to see stuff that they want to respond to. I mean, even me, you look at things, it doesn't matter whether it makes people happy or it makes people angry. The only important thing is that it pulls their attention, because attention is the currency of value. So if you have something that is just like something said by a crazy person, whereas most people would just be like, yeah, just don't listen to them. That's a crazy person. There's no one's listening to that. Well, it's like on the internet, it's the opposite. Mr. Algorithm is saying that's exactly the person we should be listening to, and we're going to get it there, and we're going to have content, producer people, and their job is to shove that stuff in your face, because they know that's going to get your attention, and you're going to look at it, and it's going to shape your whole idea of things, either positively or negatively, because if you respond to it like, that's nuts, and I've got to react to that, that's a win for the sort of media machine. And if they also look at it and react to it and are like, I'm convinced, I'm on the side of that, because people could also get pulled into being on the side of those things, and say, well, I need to pick a side, and this is clearly one of the prevailing sides, rather than some crazy extreme. Well, you get sucked into that positive, and all of a sudden you're like, I'm super on board with this. Well, that's a win too. So anyway, to just pull it back, as so many science fiction stories have said, maybe we aren't really designed to be gods. Maybe we aren't really designed to see all. And so giving us this power that gives us the illusion of seeing all, when the truth is, we really can't see any more than the tiny, tiny amounts that we really used to always be able to see. And we're going to react it like someone who takes everything that they can see as defining the world around them. And then we've been given this also immense power of what we can do, and the immense power we can wield over other people over the world. Maybe we're just not creatures that are super well designed to handle that, and we have not yet figured out how to handle it. And so currently we're still really struggling with this hyper novelty, immense changes in our native environment that we are not adapted for, and it's making us kind of crazy. And who knows how long it's going to be before we figure out how to handle it, and who knows if we even can, because things keep changing. The terrain keeps changing, and what is possible keeps changing so fast, faster than we can keep up with, that we're just going to be completely deranged by it before we ever have a chance to catch up to it and be like, here's how we should handle it. Here's the things we should do. Here's the things we shouldn't do. We're trying to figure out on the fly how to keep our seat on a rocket that is going like 5,000 miles an hour. So to sort of sum up what I was trying to say, maybe being in this state of constant hyper arousal and selective data immersion makes wielding the kind of immense and nearly infinite power over ourselves and over our others and over the worlds just a very dangerous prospect. We have made ourselves into something incredibly dangerous and unpredictable. And maybe that's why the form of the government of the United States was actually so successful, because it made it easiest to do things at the lowest and most local and most specified and most intimate levels. It said, this is where things happen, and that is what we need to maximize. And what we're trying to do is push, this is liberalism. We're going to go all in on that. We're going to say that's what we want to maximize. The most local, the most specified, the most intimate. That's where people really know things. That's where people can really do things. That's where people really see things. That's where people really understand things. So let's give power at that level instead of to these far-off kings who do not have those sorts of connections. And so we built that into the structure. We tried to maximize that. And at the same time, we tried to make it the hardest and the most complicated to do things at the largest and most sweeping levels, at these big top levels, what we would think of as the federal level now. Maximum power was assigned to the smallest social units, to the individuals, and to the families. And every step up from that point, each increase in distance and scale resulted in a drop in effective power and greater technical barriers to effective action. So, at the highest level, at the national level, the amount of checks on power, the number of contradicting stakeholders, the amount of hoops that you have to jump through, and the vulnerability of any action that you want to take to being derailed or having its wings clipped, it just increases exponentially. So it becomes extremely hard to wield power at that level, accepting like global mandate, which when you have this big federation of states, is very unlikely. All of these different groups coming from all different places and all of these different organizations, if you've designed the system that way, well, it's very unlikely you're going to get that kind of mass universal across the board mandate. And what I would say is maybe that is a brilliant move. Maybe that was the brilliance of the entire system. That it made things hard up here and it made things easy down here because it saw that's where you're really designed for. This is where you live. This is where you're powerful. And if we can find a way to organize and aggregate that power, that intimate understanding, well, then we'll have harnessed something truly powerful, far more powerful than, this one distant thing wielding over this vast, disconnected kingdom that can't really see and comprehend or act on. Maybe there's something new that we can make here. As I say, maybe that's what the brilliance of the American system is. But maybe we figured out just through time, through the way things have changed, through our own feelings, and also just through our own technological innovations, maybe we've circumvented many of the protections that were put in place to help us avoid those dangerous outcomes. We've federalized our own experience, basically, which then forces us to then fight at this highest level and be dislocated at that highest level. And maybe for all these reasons and more, that's why the liberal order is in more danger than it has been in decades. So, hope that gave you something to think about. See you next time.